Beyond the Mic with Sean Dillon.
We're joined on the Starline by a biologist who studied wildlife in Yellowstone for nearly 30 years. Though he studied everything from beavers to birds, he headed up the Yellowstone Wolf Project, which reintroduced the wolf in 1995 out on tour as a National Geographic Explorer. We welcome Doug Smith.
Hey, Sean, how are you doing? It's great to be here. Just got back from Yellowstone last night.
Absolutely great. Doug, let's go beyond the mic. How did your high school senior project change your life?
Wow, you've really done your research. It changed my life because it was my foot in the door. I was a small boy, loved the outdoors, somehow found wolves, got a lucky break working at a captive facility in Indiana called Wolf Park. And I started writing Wolf Biologist at 15. This is pen and paper. Nothing was digital back then. And they kind of, we have no room for a 15-year-old. I wrote again as an 18-year-old, and my hook was, I don't want a volunteer job. I don't want a paid job. I'm just a high school kid doing a project. Please give me a break. And the guy grew up in Germany. His name was Eric Klinghammer. Gave me a spot. My job title was Wolf Mother. I hand reared 4 wolf pups because to do research, they had to be habituated to humans. One of the other people I wrote called Dr. Klinghammer. Back in the 70s, life was simpler. And he just said, would you hire him? And Dr. Klinghammer said, yes. And that was my big break in life that in a series of events led to my job in Yellowstone. That's the story.
Your team collared 41 wolves, got them used to their new territory, then released them in Yellowstone. How did reintroducing wolves bring balance back to Yellowstone?
Well, great question. The early part of the U.S. National Park Service was based on scenery, not ecological integrity. So most predators were hated. So even though Yellowstone is the world's first national park, 1872, something every American should be very proud of, they killed off all the predators. And we didn't know what their ecological function was. So they were gone before we knew what they did. So that made Yellowstone kind of destabilized. And the elk population grew and it was overpopulated. And that impacted the plants, which impacted a whole bunch of other things. Everything in nature is connected to something else. And you didn't have this top dog wolves or cougars. Bears were reduced. So Yellowstone was not an intact ecosystem. We began to learn about what top predators did in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We realized we made a mistake with the Endangered Species Act passed in 1973. That gave us the vehicle to reintroduce wolves. Plus, it was National Park Service policy. There were no wolves around. It was too far for them to immigrate to Yellowstone on their own. We went to Canada. We put them back. In a lot of ways, the missing piece was back. And it's 30 years in. This is the 30th anniversary of wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone. It's still reshaping the park. Cougars have come back. In short, Sean, Yellowstone is an entirely different place. And you know what? Environmental news nowadays is better than it was 30, 40 years ago. This story in Yellowstone is an example of Yellowstone's better than what it was.
National Geographic Explorer Doug Smith joins us. You've been Yellowstone National Park lead wolf biologist for 28 years. Why was it time to retire and continuing to share your story of wolves?
Well, good question. Whatever we do in life is due to many things. I think wolves were a lifestyle. They were not a job. That took a lot out of me. My family mentioned that. That was one thing. I'm not anti-government. Everybody bashes on the government nowadays, but, working for the government for 28 years, I wanted to be freed up a little bit to speak out like situations like this. I didn't need to get approval to talk to you. I just clicked my Zoom link to talk to you. And so, I've spent my life studying wolves and beavers and birds and other aspects of nature. I wanted to be freed up to do other things, write books, give interviews like this, talk to National Geographic crowds. I think in a lot of ways I have a lot to say that's better by myself and preserve my familial relationships. You know how that goes.
If mama ain't happy Ain't nobody happy.
I can't comment on that one.
How many letters have you written back to 15-year-olds who, like you, want to be involved with the wilderness?
I tried to hit every one. A hero of mine, a lot of people probably haven't heard of him. His name is E.B. White. He wrote Charlotte's Web and Trumpet on the Swan, and he was a big New Yorker writer, wonderful man. And he tried to return every letter he got from kids. That was back in the day when everything was typed out on a manual typewriter. I got tons of emails, phone calls. Will you do a high school project with me? Can I work with wolves? What advice would you give me to go through college? I tried to answer every single one. Now, there's some kid out there who's going, he didn't respond to mine. That's because it fell through the cracks. I was a young person that senior level people responded to me. I tried to do the same thing throughout my career. Love young folks. I got to talk to high school kids when I come to Lubbock. I take that talk as important as anything I do on any trip. Very, very important. I try and hit everyone. Kids ask the best questions. When they come up to me after and talk, they have more spirit, enthusiasm, inspiration than any adult I've ever met. Nothing against adults, just those kids fire my jets.
And you yourself started as a 15-year-old writing letters to biologists yourself.
Correct.
National Geographic Explorer Doug Smith joins us beyond the mic. And Doug, it's time for the Rocking 8 random questions. Answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. There's no pressure. What's the longest distance you've ever cross-country skied in a day?
20 miles.
Best thing about a dog?
Loyalty.
They're kind of like a wolf. What's your favorite bird?
Golden eagle.
Best place in Yellowstone to just sit and think?
Don't want to reveal that, but Mirror Plateau. There's no trails there. Don't want anybody else to go there, but Mirror Plateau.
Do you like sunrises or sunsets?
Sunrise. Hope begins with the sunrise.
What was your first canoe, and do you still have it?
I do. 1985, Old Town Tripper. Still got it.
Very nice. Do you fish? And if you do, what's the biggest fish you've ever caught?
I do fish. Trying to think, because I'm not an avid fisherman. Both my sons are very avid fishermen. All I did was introduce them, and now they've taken control. I'd say the biggest fish I ever caught was probably a 10-pound lake trout in the Northwest Territories.
Doug, what's the one thing you love about your kids?
They love the outdoors.
National Geographic Explorer Doug Smith joins us beyond the mic. And it's time for the back half. Was there a specific wolf from the initial bunch you hoped that would make it?
Yeah, wolf number 7. So she was the daughter of wolf number 9, and wolf number 9 is very famous and had early litters of pups to help stand the population back on its feet. And she's been highly regarded, and for good reason. Wolf number 9 and her pups are the only wolves that have ever met a president of the United States. 7 was released. We had to reacclimate 9. Anyways, 9 got all the fanfare. She went on to be the matriarch of Yellowstone's New Wolf era. 7 slipped away. And that's because we paired 7 with we didn't get her dad in Alberta. And so we did matchmaking, we Valentine's Day stuff, introduced an adult male to number 9. I don't think 7 liked him. She slipped out when we released him, and she went and started her own pack. And when she did that, I was worried. She was less than a year old, so still a pup. And I was like, why'd you do that? And I'm worried about you. This is early. We uprooted you in Alberta, Canada. We brought you here, and you split off, and you should have stayed with mama. She went off and started the first naturally formed, all the packs prior to her, we had created. She went off and started the first naturally forming wolf pack on her own, established a territory in Yellowstone that's still used by wolves. I was there yesterday looking for wolves. And she went on to produce 29 offspring that made it to what we call recruitment age. That means you live through your puphood and you're going to go into the adult population. And that, in a lot of ways, was as significant as her mama, number 9. And number 9 got all the press and the ink and the fanfare. And number 7, behind the scenes, just did her thing. But it started with her slipping out quietly away, and I didn't think she'd make it. She did.
Why was it important for the Yellowstone Wolf Project to be a success?
Because it was an example to the world. America is one of the most affluent societies on the planet. And if we can't save nature, who will? We can afford to. And, I just said Yellowstone's some of the rare good news in the environmental world. There are a lot of environmental problems worldwide that we need to address. A lot we aren't. And so this, Yellowstone's a world stage, world's first national park. Wolves are, they are all across North America. They're all across Europe and Asia, Middle East. So they're an animal that has huge breadth. And that together is explosive in terms of notoriety and attention. And so we had the news of releasing wolves in Yellowstone was on the news in China in 1995. If we couldn't do it, if we failed, what example does that send to places like Africa, Asia, Europe? By the way, there's more wolves in Western Europe than there is in the continental United States. It was that important. It is a world stage that we had to show that conservation can be done. And we're not all about economic growth and money and consumerism, but we care about nature as well. Key point.
You love wolves.
My life has been dedicated to wolves. So yes, I do love them. And one reason I do is they create biodiversity. Their presence allows other more diverse creatures and even plants to exist. So they're at the center of a lot. Yes, I do love wolves.
But what's the animal that's not really at the top of your list?
Oh, geez. I love all of nature. I got to say things like, mosquitoes, black flies, ticks. I used to work in the upper Midwest. There's a lot of wolves in Minnesota. I used to work there. I got covered in ticks when I worked with them, and I hear it's worse now. I don't know if I'd want to go back to that. You can't walk in the woods and not get tons of ticks. They're at the bottom.
Doug, what's the one thing that your wildlife advisor, Dr. James Peake, taught you that made you a better scientist?
It's unbelievable the research you did. This is a rare interview that you dug that deep. He had wisdom, and wisdom's hard to come by. And he was that. And the other thing he had was time. I was a no-name, struggling young boy, man, undergraduate, trying to find my way. And I'd walk into his office, he'd push his chair back, and he had time to talk to me. And at that point in time, he did not know I was going to go on to lead the Yellowstone Wolf Project, be a voice for wolves, whatever you want to call me. He looked at me and gave me time. We had speakers come from Alaska who studied wolves. He introduced me to those people, pulled me over. Doug, you should meet this guy. I went on to develop relationships with those guys throughout my career that he started. And wonderful, wonderful man. He invited me to the Central Idaho Wilderness 4 or 5 years ago on his last trip. It's fly-in only. There's air, or you could walk in or ride in on horseback. But that touched my soul. He was 82, and he still did a big hike straight uphill. Wonderful example. But, you can teach people knowledge. They can be intelligent, but wisdom is something that's hard to get. And you only see it by example. He had it. Thank you for asking that question, Sean.
Let's talk a little research with Doug Smith. Has anyone recently asked you a question on your dissertation on dispersal strategies and cooperative breeding in beavers?
Yeah, occasionally they use it against me because they would say, how's a guy who studied beavers for a PhD end up doing wolves in Yellowstone? But the key thing about that is most mammals live in herds or singly, solitary. Very few mammals live in what are called family groups. Beavers and wolves both live in family groups. They're both territorial. If you know something about one, you'll know something about the other. And I started studying wolves before beavers. I did beavers because you know this, you're a worldly guy, I can already tell. Life's about opportunity.
Exactly.
I couldn't get a grad project studying wolves. So I had a fully funded project studying beavers, and I was like, geez, do I have to do this? They're not that interesting. They ended up being really interesting, and they're very similar to wolves because they're both family living mammals.
So do you think your thesis stands up today?
Yeah, because what I studied is what would cause a young beaver to stay home with its family or leave early and dispersal we called it, and start its own family. Exact same question applies to wolves, and the foundational rules are the same. So beavers were not a dead end for me. They were kind of a beginning.
When someone comes to see you speak, what do you want them to take away from the experience?
That there's more to life than just people. All we think about are our lives, individually and collectively, that people are the center of the universe. There's a wide world of nature out there, and all I want them to get out of it, because, you're probably thinking right now I sound preachy and I'm, in a monologue here. All I want them to do is pay attention to something else besides themselves and besides all of humanity. And I am not telling them what to pay attention to, but just think about other things and draw your own conclusions. People are just one part of the world. There's a whole other world out there that we live in that deserves attention too.
Who makes each day better for you?
Well, I'm kind of a family-oriented guy, and we're empty nesters. I love my wife. Yeah, probably my wife, and we got a very nice dog. And birds. It's spring, birds are starting to come back, and they're up against a lot, but it doesn't affect them. You don't see a wolf every day. I hate to say it. You got to go with what is it. You love what you're intimate with. So all those things I just said, I'm intimate with. Yeah.
It's time for One Big Question with National Geographic Explorer Doug Smith beyond the mic. Doug, how has this experience with wolves changed your life and the way you want people to see animals?
I learned perseverance from beavers. A lot of people think they're not intelligent, they're not clever, but they stick with it. And, so what's changed my life is, observing. I caught a lot of beavers, a couple thousand in live traps. I've caught over 600 wolves, trapping and helicopter darting. To get close to another animal and feel their personality, examine them, that's part of it. You weigh them, you measure them, you draw blood on them, you kind of learn about them. That really makes you think about the world in a different way that I think is healthy. It gives you humility. It keeps your mind open. I think that, being able to work with other animals, people's lives are, we've all heard about what goes on in the human world. We haven't heard about what goes on in wolf, beaver, yellow warbler world. And so that's kind of what's changed my life. Intimate relationships with non-human animals.
He still has his 1985 Old Town Tripper canoe, loves the hope of sunrise, and wants you to see him talking on wolves. National Geographic Explorer Doug Smith, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Sean, one of the better interviews I've ever done. I can't believe the research you did. So looking forward to talking with you guys in Lubbock.
And that, my friends, is Beyond the Mic. If you're enjoying these conversations, please check out another Beyond the Mic episode to find more actors, artists, and people you need to know. We'd also appreciate a like and subscribe on the Good Pods app.